So I'm recording. Nate, I'm going to make you the host.
Okay.
And the kid who just got called to the office, that is my cue. So I will be right back. Excuse me. You got everything, Nate?
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Perfect. I'll be back shortly just so we can keep an eye on those videos too.
Okay.
In the event that it's not working for you. So
Okay. Hi everybody. I am gonna try to get my screen shared here. Okay, can somebody give me a thumbs up or something if it looks like everything's working?
Looks
Okay,
like it's working.
Okay, thank you. I just do not do this anywhere enough to to ever really feel confident about Zoom. So, okay, so our topic today is on dating violence and sexual harassment in adolescence. Um, so I'm going to do my best to keep kind of checking about the waiting room and everything. Um, I want to encourage everybody as we're going through this to just feel free to speak up, say things in the chat if you have anything that you would like to stop and ask a question about or something that you'd like to address. Because if we can kind of have this as more of a conversation, then it's just a little bit more interesting for everybody too. So. But I did kind of want to start off with opening it up to everybody because, this topic is on dating violence and sexual harassment. So with you guys, how do you define dating violence? I mean, what comes to mind whenever you hear that word? Feel free to unmute yourself and share if there or chat if you'd like to, but I just kind of want to see where we're at. How do you guys define dating violence?
Like lack of consent.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's absolutely a part of it. Really dating violence is kind of an umbrella term, right? So really it's going to cover a lot. Okay, so let's see, Kristen, you have control, alienation, verbal and physical. Absolutely. It's every bit of that. Um, I think when we think of dating violence, that word violent, I think kind of what comes to mind probably for most people is the idea of physical violence or sexual violence, something along like those lines. um, and that's certainly a part of it, but it's also a lot broader. And we'll get into all of that. I do want to say, this topic for some people could potentially be kind of triggering. So please self-monitor if you need to step away for a little bit. By all means, please do. I know that as I was doing some looking through the research on this particular topic, it was definitely at times very disturbing to just see what's out there and what the research says and some of the statistics. Because we're talking about kids, um, it some of the things might even be a little hard to hear. If you have to step away, then feel free. Um, The definition that I have for teen dating violence or just dating violence, is going to be any intentional or psychological, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse that occurs between people involved in a romantic relationship. So that relationship piece, I think, is key whenever we're talking about dating violence. Obviously, abuse can be, any of these terms, and happens and certainly does. but it's going to be more, but just abuse can happen with or without a dating relationship. For our purposes, we're mostly going to be kind of talking about that which happens within a dating relationship. So it can have immediate consequences. There's also some lasting health consequences. It's also does not necessarily depend on gender. You know, kids who identify as male or female, it doesn't really matter, can be victims of dating violence. Overall, whenever we look at it, it is our women and girls who are, the most frequent and serious victims, because this can also result in murders. Most often, whenever murders happen related to teen dating violence, it is it's girls that are dealing with this. Murder is a leading cause of death for women and adolescent girls, unfortunately. It can also be a big predictor of marital violence or domestic violence later on in life. We've come a long way overall, just not exactly far enough. In the past, there was definitely a notion that domestic violence, dating violence was something that was between two romantic partners, not something to be interfered with, something to stay out of, another person's home and their business. The Violence Against Women Act was passed in 1994, and this did help to start shifting some of that public opinion. It also helped to improve some services for victims and of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, of stalking. It also did have an impact in how the criminal justice system handles these types of crimes. But really, when I think 1994, maybe this is partly, age talking, but, that's just not that long ago. We're talking 30 years. So the fact that this major, law was passed only 30 years ago, really kind of shows, we may not be very far, but just how far away from, fair and equitable things really had been previously. Frequency. So I'm going to preface this by saying that some of this will seem kind of all over the place, because really the research for teen dating violence specifically is not anywhere near up to the standards of what's available for adult dating violence or domestic violence. And so we're looking at a whole lot of different research that has found things in this age group or boys or girls or both, and it can be a little bit all over the place. So if something seems conflicting, it doesn't mean that it's inaccurate data. It just means that we're drawing these data from different sources. So up to 19% of teens can will experience sexual or physical dating violence. Up to half of teens are going to say that they have dealt with stalking harassment. 65% will report some type of psychological abuse. 1 in 12 high school students will experience physical dating violence, and pretty much the same numbers for sexual dating violence. Which, doing the math on that's something like 8 or 9%. And then we look up at the very top and it says up to 19% of teens experience one or the other. Again, just kind of keep in mind that this is pulling from different sources. But, bottom line, a sizable portion of our teens are dealing with this. When we're talking about young people ages 14 to 21, we do end up with some what I thought were some fairly surprising statistics. So 51% of females have reported being victims, while 43% of males have reported being victims. 50% of females report being perpetrators, while only 35% of males report being perpetrators. Okay, so as far as what to make of this, that's kind of left up to the viewer. But I kind of wanted to see from you guys, when you see this, when you see that we have similar numbers of victims, females definitely reporting a higher rate, and other research actually shows them fairly even. But whenever we see that a significantly higher rate of females in this age group being perpetrators. I'm just kind of curious, what comes to mind for you guys whenever you see that?
think often, Nate, it may just be a situation of, I mean, what we're seeing is a society so often, whether male or female, people not having learned appropriate outlets, appropriate coping strategies, and oftentimes, unfortunately, taking those out on the people around them in whatever relationship it is, has been my view of it.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts as we look at these? Okay. Well, I'll just kind of move on. Again, please feel free to stop me at any time. Please feel free to interject, share something in the chat anytime that you guys like. More than happy to address anything at any point, and don't worry about like interrupting my flow or anything. There is across different across different studies, we definitely find that this is actually fairly consistent, that there are age groups where we can see that that girls are possibly even more likely to be perpetrators than the boys. Okay, looks like somebody's comment. Okay, very interesting data. Surprising as the perpetrators. I thought so too, really. I mean, I was a little shocked to find out that there are these age groups where girls are more likely. And it definitely shows the diversity of really this term of dating violence, that it's not just a violent act, physical or sexual, but also emotional is a huge component here too. We'll kind of break down this a little bit further later on. Our older teens, Native American, Pacific Islanders, LGBTQIA plus students, they do all definitely experience higher rates of dating violence than others. Okay, Gloria, you said, is it that they're more likely to talk about this honestly? I think that's a really good point, especially whenever we consider this, this figure of 43% of males reporting being victims, right? Is it an honesty thing? Are they afraid to share that they are? Are they actually completely clueless that they are being a victim of dating violence in some kind of way? From the perpetrator side, are the boys less likely to admit it? Possibly, but this does show up in other research as well. So it seems to be a fairly consistent thing. The label of perpetrator, that was your question. The label of perpetrator is going to be the person who is perpetrating the relationship violence in some kind of way. The perpetrator doesn't mean somebody who's hitting or sexually abusing somebody. Could be that they are a perpetrator of emotional abuse, right? So the person who's in power, which is something that we're going to actually tie in a little bit later. Definition of teen. Well, in this, we've got young people 14 to 21. And you'll see different statistics as well. There was a study in the UK. It was a large study with 10,000 teens that showed that those who were 17 years old who had experienced sexual violence, specifically from the ages of 14 to 17, had much more mental health problems, and they were more likely to self-harm and have suicide attempts than the general population. Okay, so frequency, a little bit more on this. A quarter of our 8th and 9th grade students have experienced dating violence. 8% of them have been victims of sexual dating violence. And again, we're talking about our 8th and 9th grade students. Adolescence is definitely the time where people are at the highest rate of sexual assault, which I think maybe sometimes as a society, we kind of, when we think about teens and the possibility of sexual assault, we probably think more often of, creepy adult that we have to protect them from, but actually half of these assaults are happening within dating relationships. So yes, we do obviously need to protect them from adults, but we also need to arm them against, people who are their age as well. So again, teen dating violence is often overlooked in our research and by society. While both male and female students can definitely be victims of relationship violence or dating violence or sexual relationship violence, our females are definitely the ones who experience greater consequences overall. And we will look into that a little bit more if you have questions about that. Students who identify as LGBTQIA plus or somebody who's just maybe uncertain of their gender identity, they are more frequently victims of dating violence than our heterosexual cisgender students. Specifically, our risk to girls. 12.5% of our high school girls have reported that they have been forced into experiencing sexual intercourse. There was another study that showed that 1 in 5 high school girls have been either physically or sexually abused. And when this happens with girls, they're actually more likely to be injured, than boys. There can definitely be harm, hurt one way or another. But we're talking about when we're talking about injury, we're talking about very serious and that might need some form of medical intervention. Age 14 is the year that young women are the most risk of sexual assault. And there is definitely a lot of evidence that shows, like I said before, that there are ages where girls are more likely to be the perpetrators, but when it comes to sexual violence, they are definitely the main victims. They're also, our teen girls are 3 times more likely to suffer a beating than boys. So again, it's not to minimize what's going on with our boys because it certainly happens with them, but I'm even reluctant to say that, use the word serious, but it is definitely the case where girls have much bigger consequences overall whenever this stuff is going on. Overall, whenever we look at injuries to women, period, the most likely and most frequent reason for those injuries is domestic violence. Okay, so just our kids in general that are higher risk. These are going to be our kids who have been through trauma. They have ACEs, kids in poverty. They are much more likely to be both victims and perpetrators of abuse. In fact, when speaking of some of those ACEs, right? One of the ACEs that we talk about is going to be witnessing domestic violence, and there is at least one study that suggested that up to 70% of kids who come from families where they've witnessed domestic violence will be either a victim or a perpetrator. They're significantly more likely to be both. So boys that witness family violence are 4 times more likely to assault their dates. When we think about perpetration, this is definitely linked to several different things. They have more, it's going to be linked to people who have more approving attitudes towards violence, who have adversarial beliefs about gender. So we're talking about toxic masculinity, really. Folks who have these types of ways of thinking are significantly more likely to be perpetrators. Also, folks who have or kids who have depression, substance use, who've been in trouble with the juvenile justice system, they are all more likely to be perpetrators. So what it looks like, we're gonna talk about several different ways. Stalking or harassment can be a form of dating violence, right? So again, kind of branching away from that idea of violence as just something that's causing physical pain. Stalking and harassment, that can be a form of dating violence. This can be spying on a partner, which is a lot different now for kids than it was. When most of us were kids, spying on somebody would probably mean, this image of somebody like in the bushes with a pair of binoculars. But now there's electronic stalking that can occur, and really being able to follow exactly what's going on with their partner with online activity. Sexual harassment sometimes is just thought of as part of development, or like boys will be boys. And my God, is that not setting the bar extremely low for our boys? when we think of this as something that's just, oh, it's just normal, right? Then it changes the way we all respond to it, because we're not taking it as seriously with that type of thinking. Um, and um, and also we're allowing it really to just kind of continue. We're letting boys think that this is just okay when it's not. Boys and girls can both be sexually harassed. Absolutely. Our girls are again going to receive more negative consequences, though, for this. They are a lot more likely than their male counterparts to feel self-conscious or embarrassed afterwards. They are more likely to lose some confidence afterwards. And the girls are a lot more likely to actually change behaviors that they have. Like maybe they won't talk in class anymore to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Maybe they take steps to completely avoid the person that's harassing them. Boys and girls can certainly both do these behavior changing kind of things, but our girls are even more likely to. So it can certainly look like physical or sexual violence when we're talking about dating violence. Obviously this is going to be like, physically harming somebody, hitting, kicking. That could be possibly, holding somebody down or twisting limbs or things like that. Um, okay. Okay. Looks like, Kevin, that was just, you were giving Gloria a response. So thank you. Sexual violence can be, forcing somebody to engage in sex acts, sexual touching, posting sexual pictures, and this is all kind of about consent. And really, consent is kind of a tricky thing with minors, because they're not legally able to give consent. Whenever two minors have sex, it's not like something criminal is necessarily going on, but whenever we think about things like, whether or not somebody had permission to post pictures, it doesn't really matter, because that, whether they even said something was okay or not, it's not real consent, because we're talking about, somebody having nude pictures of a child. We're talking about child pornography, right? There's no way that a person can consent to that, right? This next statistic, more than probably anything else that I share at all, I think really just speaks to our need to educate our kids, because there was a survey that showed that 62% of the students in the survey believe that a boy is not at fault for raping a girl who dresses provocatively on their date. And my God, that one blew me away whenever I read that. That's mind-boggling. I don't. I mean, what a what a what bigger picture of ignorance could we possibly have, that that kids could possibly think that because a girl wore something that she felt confident and cute in, that this means that she was asking to be raped. I mean, that part, I don't know, more than anything else, it kind of blew me away. Definitely shows that we have got to educate our kids. Let's see, we got.
And
Okay,
Nate, to your point just now, I just said something about I hope we've come a ways in being able to remove some stigmas, but at the same time, I mean, reading that statistic then right thereafter, the stigma may be off the reporting and the talking about it, but certainly it's probably going to require more of a paradigm shift in thinking if, almost 2/3 of the students surveyed think that, oh, well, that's, perfectly acceptable, which clearly not. Terrible.
Mhm. Okay, so we've got some agreement in the chat. Um, it is hard for kids to open up. Kids who feel, who have been assaulted may feel some guilt or shame, sense of responsibility about what's done to them. In a study of high school girls who had been physically or sexually assaulted, 29% did not tell anyone. Um, probably what this one made me think of was a situation where, you know, probably most of you guys have had to make multiple DCFS calls, right? When I was working in the schools, I had to do it almost, it seemed like constantly. I would say at least once a month, I was probably making a DCFS call. And I remember one in particular um, where the call also resulted in some police action, and trying to be there for this student while all of the different questioning was going on with her. Um, by the end of it, it was all over her face. She wished she had never said a single thing. And you know, when we think about like our process of protecting these kids, sometimes is also a traumatizing experience in and of itself. I mean, no wonder, really, no wonder so many kids end up staying silent. Uh, so all right, going to a little bit farther on what dating violence sometimes looks like. We're also talking about psychological aggression. We're talking about, you know, trying to inflict mental damage. This can be verbal, it can be nonverbal, either way, but also trying to exert control over somebody. We're talking about things like mind games, gaslighting, spreading rumors, all this stuff. This is dating violence. You know, a lot of times the abusers are really, really good at appearing charming to people outside of the relationship. I have I have a lot of adults in just bad relationships, not necessarily violent relationships, though, you know, sometimes that's debatable, but even just ones where things are just not good, you know, the other person might be still very good at looking very charming to everybody else, putting on a good show, right? Because most people can kind of hang in there and put on a good show for up to a couple of hours, but then they don't maintain it whenever they get home. This can make victims feel like nobody's going to believe them if they try to get help or if they try to leave. It can also look like online, you know, dating violence can be online activity. Maybe it's that monitoring of what they're doing, the stalking online. Um, Maybe it is getting a hold of passwords and actually changing things on social media or online accounts. It can be sexting without consent, posting hurtful comment online, making threatening messages. And all of this stuff is a warning sign of in-person violence later on. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this video, and we're going to hope that we actually have sound. Last time we had that problem, so we'll see how this goes. And I'll put on subtitles just in case we don't. All right. Okay, so I wanted to kind of stop at that point and just ask if anybody has any questions or anybody has any comments. You know, as we've talked about kind of what this dating violence really is, some statistics about it, how many people are dealing with it.
Did the audio come through okay on the video for everybody, Nate? Did you feel like, did that play okay on your end and everything?
It played okay on my end. I don't know about you guys. Did everyone hear it or?
I was gonna say, I could hear it fine.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully that worked last time,
Okay.
this time. But again, does anybody have any comments, anything that they'd like to share? Okay. All right. So some of the consequences of teen dating violence. They are definitely more likely to, the victims are more likely to experience depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, to have PTSD or other mental health disorders, unhealthy weight loss. It's definitely also linked to some risk-taking behaviors, like drugs, alcohol, or tobacco. These kids have an increased risk of pregnancy and STDs. They are more likely to have some antisocial behaviors like lying, bullying, theft, hitting, all those kinds of things. They are also more likely to think about or attempt suicide. And again, like I said previously, this sets the stage for future relationship problems. Okay, so as far as some of the research, again, it's not studied to the same extent as with adults. Okay, traditionally, whenever it has been studied, it's been studied sort of separately from other risky teen behaviors like bullying, unprotected sex, sexual harassment, low academic performance, drug and alcohol use, STDs, other violent acts. Um, all of these things, along with teen dating violence, also have similar risk factors like high ACEs or witnessing family violence. To take this a little step further, though, the very same risk factors that I just mentioned, the bullying, unprotected sex, sexual harassment, low grades, STDs, violent acts, those are also risk behaviors um, for dating violence. And on top of that cake, we've also got that depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem are also associated with this. So really, we're talking about one giant ball of messed up situations for kids that are all linked together, right? So you can't really parse these out because any of these factors, whether we're talking about depression, whether we're talking about ACEs, whether we're talking about teen dating violence or bullying behavior, it all makes it all a lot more likely to be occurring. So we're talking about all of it, right? Which means that our kids at risk are at risk for more than just what they present with. Our kids at risk are just at risk. Okay. Um, Also, the more severe or intense the violence, the greater the likelihood that they're going to develop some sort of psychological disorder later on. Okay, so the National Institute of Justice sponsored this study called Strive. It was a long one over 7 years. And they looked at, they tried to gather as much information as they could. One of the things that they found that I thought was kind of interesting was that 84% of victims also perpetrate abuse to some degree. So their suggestion is that many violent relationships have some level of violence coming from both sides. Okay. So I think it would be really easy to see that statistic and say, well, then we're talking about situations where there's no victim, that now both are perpetrators. But realistically, this isn't really the case because when we're talking about some level of violence, sometimes kids sometimes people that are getting abused are trying to fight back to protect themselves. Sometimes they are just fed up and they are angry and they are lashing out as well. But in these types of relationships, we're not usually talking about, two perpetrators and two true perpetrators and two true victims. Usually what we're talking about is still that one person has the power and the other person doesn't. And when that's the case, we're not talking about two perpetrators. Okay, so girls from 15 to 18, again, slightly different from some statistics earlier. the girls were 3 times more likely to perpetrate physical violence or to threaten in a relationship. They were also 4 times more likely to perpetrate psychological abuse than the same age boys. Um, so and when we look at dating violence, it's also this study found that it was associated with mental health problems, and again, family exposure to violence and verbal abuse. Again, like before, the correlation to family violence, they're more likely to be victims of abuse coming from homes with domestic violence, just like they're more likely to be perpetrators if they're coming from a home with domestic violence. It showed in this study that youth who have positive parenting are much less likely to perpetrate or be victims of dating violence. Just another note, it's harder to abuse a teen whenever the parents are highly involved and frequently around. Now that, please do not confuse that with me saying that, parents who are involved won't have kids who are abused or who are victims in dating violence or who are even perpetrators. That's not the case at all. It is to say that it's harder, right? Because this stuff has to be hid better from parents who are a little bit more involved and aware. Certainly, it is not to say that good parents don't have kids who are involved in some way with dating violence, because plenty of good parents have this stuff going on. It's just that it's a little harder. So the more involved that we can be, and the more that we can model positive relationships ourselves, the less likely there is to be some dating violence, though we can't take away the risk altogether at all. Fights about money are also associated with dating violence. I thought initially this was kind of surprising, because we're not probably talking about kids who are sharing income. But then, the more that I thought about that, still, if they're going to be going out and doing things together, we're talking about, money, and where does that come from? Kids don't usually have a chance to make a lot of money. Some parents are going to contribute more, some parents are going to contribute less to their kids' ability to have a social life. So, it kind of stands to reason that money could still be a factor in dating violence. It's also something that, when we think of the top reasons that adults have arguments and fights within their marriage, sex or money, those are the top reasons. So, if we can do something about this, it seems like we can kind of install another protective feature later on. The Strive study also showed that males from neighborhoods with higher gender equality were less likely to perpetrate abuse. Now, dating violence does not necessarily, it doesn't matter even as much about the crime in the neighborhood. Poverty is definitely an issue. Poverty is definitely something that makes dating violence more likely. But gender equality actually has a bigger effect, and especially on the boys, again, that they are less likely to perpetrate. Relationships that are just generally unhealthy, have high levels of controlling behavior, or some cheating, lack of closeness. These all will bring about more likelihood of violence within the relationship. Sexual harassment happens right alongside of dating violence. It is often a part of it. And when we and one of the things that they found too was that previous exposure to violence makes kids 3 times more likely to experience future dating violence and sexual harassment. So, when they've experienced it once, they're more likely to be experiencing it again. They also found that boys who believe in traditional gender stereotypes are a lot more likely to sexually harass somebody. So their recommendations were to address the family environments, look at the extent to which kids are actually, viewing violence within their homes. They recommended minimizing gender stereotyping and try to have as much gender equity as possible, because that will get rid of some of those sort of traditional dang it, what's the word I'm looking for? It will get rid of some of that toxic masculinity kind of thinking. Um, Help kids to learn how to manage money conflicts in a constructive way, and also probably just even helping them manage money can also be something that could be helpful here. They suggested that prevention programs should be addressing dating violence and sexual harassment, and they suggested helping kids learn how to build healthy relationships. So when we think about some of those traditional ways that schools especially are trying to help, kids with, relationship skills, skill building, um, then we might be thinking of some of those, required by Aaron's Law kind of presentations. We might be thinking of assemblies. We might be thinking of something that comes up briefly in health class, which realistically are just not actually all that effective at helping kids build the skills that they're needing. It's a lot more effective to have some community-oriented strength-based approaches, and the schools can often have some impact on that. Helping kids to build some overall resilience and self-esteem is helpful for reducing some of this relationship violence. Helping kids to learn how to regulate themselves, how to improve their communication skills. Helping our bystanders know what to do, how to step in and help prevent some of this, or to know what to do when they see it. Peer-led programs to help kids have a say in this, not necessarily just to be something from the adults that is, we think it's important for you guys to learn these skills, but for students to have some buy-in, to be able to feel like, they've got some skin in the game. Digital monitoring with student laptops to know what's going on would be helpful, and I think a lot of schools are doing that already. But but even addressing, with kids, how to handle some of the stress that comes with seeing what's going on with their partner's feed, all those different things, some of those stress-inducing kind of situations, how to be able to handle that. I mean, sometimes kids just need some help learning how to deal with the stress that's coming up. Helping kids to learn how to build and manage healthy relationships, handle their own difficult feelings, communicate in healthy ways. We all know that a lot of times these kids are not learning these skills at home. Okay, so why does this happen? When we're working with kids, a lot of times the recommendation is view all behavior as communication, right? And this is no exception. Okay. When we're talking about a kid in the classroom who gets upset and throws a desk, right? What is that kid trying to communicate, right? So if we can kind of think about it the same way, then we can start to learn. We can start to figure out what's going on. We can start to figure out what to do about it. Violence often happens whenever people haven't learned the skills for managing conflicts, because they're going to be dealing with jealous feelings. Kids are going to deal with rejection, or they're going to have this stuff going on, but they may not know how to actually deal with it. They're also, they're also watching things happen in real time in a very public place, with internet activity, because whatever a kid might be posting on their feed or their story, that's happening for really kind of the whole world to see. And so this can be a whole nother level for kids to have to deal with this kind of stress that when we were kids we didn't have to deal with. Dating violence can be antisocial behavior. It can be a kid who doesn't have a conscience, but most of the time that's not the case. Most of the time it kind of comes down to these kids lacking skills. So it may be kind of tempting, I think, to just sort of minimize this, to say that these kids are just being monsters, the perpetrators. But in reality, they're kids. They're kids who don't know any better. And if we help them to do better, then we can help them in the future so that this stuff doesn't continue. When we think about kids and teens, it is completely developmentally normal for them to explore sexuality, explore their identity. And we've got to do a better job of allowing them to explore this and protect them all at the same time. Okay. So sometimes, they just may not have enough knowledge or experience to be able to know the difference between I'm trying to show some interest in somebody versus I'm showing extremely inappropriate behavior. Um, when we think about our functional behavior analysis that happen all the time in schools, one of the things that we look at is this a skill deficit or is it a performance deficit? I think most of the time, if we're being honest on those, it's usually a skill deficit, right? Even if sometimes it feels maybe the other way, maybe feels kind of personal. A lot of times it's usually a skill deficit. We need to also think of this most of the time as a skill deficit. To kind of address culture, right? As adults, we only have so much control over, the culture that's going on with the kids. But we do have some control, and we need to kind of seize what we can, because if we're ignoring sexual harassment, if kids that maybe come forward feel a sense of shame or blame for reporting, then the adults themselves are reinforcing a culture of dating violence that it's just okay to do here. Okay. Um, the part where we may have less control over is when students who are, if there's a student who is sexually harassing somebody or being violent towards others, all while continuing to become more popular, then their behavior is most likely going to continue. When we look at patriarchal cultures, this is where violence really gets to gain some traction, because patriarchal thinking is all about, men are domineering while women are dominated. That men are aggressive and strong, women are frail and helpless, right? This makes it really easy for people to justify violence and not even necessarily think of it as abuse, right? That video that I showed you guys, that because I love you, right? Now, I mean, those are teen actors, I'm sure, right? But that is the thinking, right? Um, I think as people, we're incredibly good at justifying things. We can come up with all sorts of reasons to justify all kinds of behaviors. It can be a really slippery slope at times, but it can be really easy for abusers to justify that they're not abusing, to think of this as just, well, but yeah, I hit her, but, or and it can also, to the flip side, it can be easy for our victims to justify things, like, well, maybe, yeah, she hit me, but, you know, it's not really abuse, right? Because we're really, really good at that. And so we need to kind of keep that in mind too, talking with these kids, that they've probably made some justifications along the way to allow this to continue. Okay, so again, patriarchal cultures, just kind of going a little bit further with that. In these types of thinking, in these types of cultures, boys are going to be more likely to assert themselves with violence if they feel threatened. That's how fragile that masculinity is, really, whenever we're talking about this. Because once it starts to fall apart, it's like they've got nothing left but to just react with violence. Dating violence is also not, it's linked to racism. It's linked to, a sense of other, really. So the kids who are most likely to have been brought up with some racist thinking are probably also the kids who are brought up with some sexist type thinking. Okay. And when we really look at how violence is structured, whenever society is denying power to some groups, we're going to see some small and some large levels of violence, right? And then, that can actually impact the patterns that people are learning about how they're supposed to interact socially, and just, kind of feed the problem and contribute to even more problems in the future. Okay, so for schools or other places, there are some, I know schools love their programs, right? So there are some programs that are out there for prevention of dating violence. The Safe Dates program is designed to reduce physical and sexual dating violence, perpetration, and victimization. And they had some, they show that their results last up to 4 years after the intervention. The fourth R has some reduction in dating violence and also increased condom use. Um, kind of not necessarily a specific program, but mindfulness interventions. Mindfulness is fantastic for helping our kids learn how to improve their emotional regulation, and there's a lot less aggression often with kids who are participating in mindfulness groups. Project Strong is a video game type of program that middle school parents and their sons play together, and it teaches emotional regulation skills and discusses some relationship topics. This project, Date Smart, it was designed for girls in the juvenile justice system, helps with teaching emotional regulation, communication skills, problem solving. Sources of Strength is a peer mentor kind of program, which helps them to intervene whenever they witness this. Bringing in the Bystander and Green Dot are both about bystander interventions as well. These are all about helping kids to learn how to be a little bit more creative. So if they see something going on, how do they create a distraction? How do they get involved in ways that are even, not necessarily direct confrontation of like, hey, you can't do that, but to, kind of learn how to create a distraction, or learn how to, kind of spot something that might be going on and intervene in ways that don't look like intervention at all, but just look like support. When we think about these different types of programs, though, we also need to keep in mind some considerations about our LGBTQIA+ students, that a lot of these programs are designed for heterosexual cisgender youth. These students who identify differently than our again heterosexual cisgender youth are a lot more vulnerable, because they may be worried about stigma, just because a student might be identify as homosexual, that they might identify as trans, that they might identify as as one way or another. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are ready to be outed, and maybe especially at home. So they may worry that if they say anything that they're going to be outed. They may worry about facing some stigma from others. So whatever programs we do, it's just important to make sure that we're protecting all of our students. Okay, to kind of zero in on sexual harassment a little bit more, there was a study where with some young adults, and 87% said that they had experienced sexual harassment. However, within that group of kids who had been sexually harassed, 72% of the males and 80% of the females said that they had never had a conversation with their parents about how to avoid harassing others, or being harassed, or other types of misogyny. So whenever we talk to kids about sexual harassment, we definitely want to be very clear and define it, so that they know. Because again, like I said before, I think some cases kids just really don't even know what it really is. Kids might genuinely think that catcalling somebody is a compliment, right? Not really realizing that most people just don't really care for that. When we do get involved, we want to step in and stay. So whenever we see sexually harassing behavior going on, we need to intervene, even if you think that it won't make a difference, because there is definitely a possibility that it won't in that moment, right? So stepping in to intervene whenever we see sexual harassment going on, yeah, there's a chance that maybe it doesn't actually change anything. The flip side is that by not doing anything, we're showing that we condone it, that we're okay with it, that it's okay and acceptable, okay? So sometimes it's not necessarily about whether or not we can make a difference in the moment in terms of stopping the behavior. Sometimes it's about, what does my silence mean if I don't do anything about this? It's important to teach our kids how to be critical of the media that they're consuming. So, maybe it could be helpful to explore some lyrics, comments that are seen, how do kids feel whenever they see the word bitch used, or some of this degrading kind of language? Like, what comes up with them? Do you think that this is just okay? What does this mean to you, right? Um, we need to help kids know what to do and where to go if they're experiencing harassment, if they're getting harassed. A lot of them just flat out don't know. And we also need to encourage kids how to stand up for each other. I do believe this one very strongly because I think that whatever it is that the culture of the school, the kids kind of agree upon, sort of, with these unwritten rules about, what they're okay with, whatever it is that's kind of generally decided is the way that it's going to be, right? So if we have if there's an environment where kids just agree that we're going to be nice here, we're just not going to be mean to each other, we're not going to harass each other, we're not going to be awful to each other, then it would actually be unpopular to do the opposite, right? And then that harassment would drop. Now, this is a little pie in the sky, I realize, but if we can get kids on board with changing the culture, then that's where the real change has an opportunity to happen. If we can also help kids to find other areas of self-worth, because maybe a student who is attractive doesn't think that there's anything else necessarily very impressive about them. But if we can help kids explore this idea that there's a lot good about them, in a lot of different other areas other than maybe just the physical, then we can help make them a little bit less vulnerable to that harassment. Okay, we got something in the chat. Okay, let's see. Kevin, you said that the messages on social media are ruthless to say the least. Absolutely. Yeah, when kids have a chance to hide behind a computer as they make a comment, they can be pretty awful. Okay, so if we are helping a kid in a violent relationship, first off, the best thing that we can do is show up with some concern and our intention to help. But we can't show up with a plan of we're going to whisk them away, we're going to get them out of this thing. It's not about trash talking the partner and saying how bad they are. We definitely also do not want to, give any kind of reason to make them think that they're going to be judged because they probably already got that fear. So avoid any kind of blaming questions like, well, what did you do before he said that? That's not the questions that we want to be asking. We want to just be giving support. Okay. We can definitely help them make a safety plan, which we'll go into a little bit more. But we do not want to take away their control, right? We don't want to tell them what to do or how they're supposed to feel. Don't make any assumptions about that. Be 100% honest about confidentiality. Let them know what you can keep to yourself and what you can't. Try to avoid also making some gender-based assumptions about the partner if we don't know who the partner is. If you're completely certain of who that partner is and what their identified gender is, then by all means, I guess, don't worry so much about what pronouns you're using. But if you don't know, then usually it's just kind of best to keep things vague. Use they, their kind of pronouns until you figure out who they're talking about, if you even have the chance to do so. We want to also show kids that we support them, whether they stay with the partner or whether they don't, because even if they break up, that doesn't mean that it's over. There was a Seinfeld episode where Jerry said that ending a relationship is like knocking over a Coke machine. Sometimes you can't get it on the first push. You got to knock it back and forth a few times first. And I think that whenever we're talking about these really complicated kind of relationships and all these really complicated types of feelings that are going on, that may definitely be the case. Okay, so we want to be very considerate about any kind of cultural differences that also might come up. Okay, so what does this mean to me? All right, I'm a white man, heterosexual, cisgender, right? Okay, so when I think about my experiences, right? Let's talk about the white part. I've been pulled over several times since I've been 16, and there has not been a single time, not a single time that I worried about my safety. I worried about my insurance rates going up, and when I was a kid, I worried about getting in some trouble at home. I did not worry about whether or not I was walking away from that experience, not once. It didn't even occur to me. Okay. Um, I'm a man, right? So when I have, you know, there was a time that I was training for a half marathon, and I did some running on the river road, and I didn't give a second thought to anybody that was coming up or approaching or going past me. And I know that when I would pass women, I know that at least some of them probably had the thought going on of, I really just hope this guy leaves me alone. It wasn't something that had to even occur to me. I just it I didn't. I only really even know about it because my wife tells me how uncomfortable she is with certain situations. Um, so I'm heterosexual. There is not a single time that I have ever worried about getting harassed or bothered because I was holding hands with my wife. Just haven't worried about it. And I haven't had to worry about, that being a dangerous thing for me either. Um, I'm cisgendered. I can wear whatever I want without having to worry about whether somebody's going to mock me or try to shame me. I haven't had to worry about my own personal safety wearing what I feel like is, what I feel comfortable wearing. Right. So, we use this term privilege, right? And I think sometimes people have kind of a problem with that term, but this is my privilege, right? I mean, this doesn't mean that I've had an easy life. This doesn't mean that there's nothing that's ever gone wrong for me, but it does mean that the color of my skin, my gender, my sexual orientation, and how I identify my gender, those things have never made things more difficult for me, right? So I want to keep those things into consideration when I'm talking to somebody who might be different from me in some kind of way. Um, Okay, so when we're talking with teens that are in violent relationships, we want to also give them some facts about dating violence. Definitely educate them on the cycle of abuse. We also have to keep our own issues in check because this can be an extremely triggering experience for the people involved who are trying to help, and we've got to make sure that we're doing our own self-care afterwards. We want to try to encourage, but not necessarily take away their ability, and force it, but we want to encourage them to speak with their parents or guardians about the violence. So I have another video for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and play it now. We're going to hope there's no ads. Fingers crossed. Oh, okay, Gloria, looks like you weren't able to hear it. Hopefully you were able to, see um, the closed captioning. And I don't know, I hope that wasn't a problem for anybody else too. We had that happen last time that we did this presentation or did a presentation here.
You want me to try to roll it from my end, Nate?
Well, if did you guys we can certainly play it again if you guys would like. Kevin can do that, or if you picked it up from the closed captioning, we can move on, or we can play it again, whatever you guys would prefer. Okay, Shelley says closed captioning worked for her. Okay. Um, you know what, Kevin, if I have any videos on the next one, I think that we'll just definitely have you go ahead and play them, and we'll see if the volume works. I have no idea what the problem is, but something's
No
getting
worries.
lost in translation.
Yeah, me neither. Sorry about that.
No,
Yeah,
it's
the
not a
first one.
problem.
First one was good.
Okay, well, good. Okay. For those who might be working with the abuser, you have an extra challenge on your hands because they usually don't ask for help, and they're usually, denying any kind of blame. They can, again, also be very charming. They may have already fooled a lot of different people. Um, when confront them neutrally when necessary, but don't use fight. That's too broad, that's too vague, and you can kind of justify anything with the word fighting. Instead, use terms like hit or push, right? If they minimize their responsibility or the harm that's done, that needs to be challenged, right? Again, carefully and calmly and politely, but challenged. um, be very clear with them about your confidentiality as well. And even, let them know that, yes, this is a very brave thing that you're doing to actually talk about what's going on here. um, the abusers need to be educated about abuse. Do not use terms like anger problems. Generally speaking, I don't let this fly whenever I'm doing counseling. I don't allow the word anger problems to just be kind of left out there without challenging it. Because I mean, what are anger problems really? I mean, we all get angry. Anger problems usually refer to I did something while I was angry, right? But even using that term, it's almost like it's justifying things. Okay. So violence is different than anger, right? So violence is a choice, it's asserting power over somebody. Anger is fine, anger is acceptable. Violence is not acceptable. That would be the difference. And we need to be very clear about that. Um, so again, still working with the abuser. Know that the two of them may be both violent towards each other at times, but again, that doesn't mean that they're both abusers and that no one's a victim. It means that one of them is going to have the power, and whoever it is that has the power, that's the abuser. Okay. Um, we want to try to work with them to explore where they figured out that there's a link between relationships and violence. Talk with them about how there's long-term consequences, both for them later on and also for their partner, what might be happening, right? We want to help them to develop some empathy. We want to help them to learn that there are different ways of thinking than maybe the patriarchal type of thinking that they've been most likely thinking before, right? We want to also encourage them to be honest with their parents or guardians. Most importantly, though, do not try to attempt couples counseling with them. I'm one of the things that I offer here at Restorative Solutions is couples counseling. I'm trained in that. I absolutely will not do it if there's abuse going on in the relationship, because it's pointless. It actually won't do anything. What it will do is create a situation where um, when the victim does try to be honest about, how they're feeling and what's going on, that it's not safe to do it. They're probably gonna get abused later on for that. Okay, and so couples counseling does not work when there's a power imbalance that's caused by dating violence. So just don't do it. When we're helping the victim, some specifics would be helping them to figure out what their supports are, where they can go, who they can turn to, how to identify what's a healthy relationship versus an unhealthy one. And start to look at some things like, how is this affecting your life? Are you missing out on some things? Are you late for things? Is this damaging other relationships? Do you ever feel pressured into things? I'm all about advocating that balance is important in all areas of our life, right? And so whenever there's an intense focus on me, then I'm getting my needs met, but you're not. When there's an intense focus on you, then you're getting your needs met, but I'm not. And if we're just completely zeroed in on this relationship, well, then we can also lose our identities as individuals, right? So it's all about having a healthy balance, a healthy give and take, and even a healthy way of looking at the relationship itself. Um, Here I just have some whenever we're talking with kids, we want to kind of show them that there's a flip side to maybe stuff that they've been experiencing already, right? So the flip side to um, emotional or verbal abuse is going to be non-threatening behavior, sexual manipulation. The opposite, the healthy side of that would be sexual safety. um, you know, Instead of financial abuse, financial independence, and so on. So it would be kind of helping them to kind of take a look at what it is that's going on in their relationship that may be unhealthy and showing them what would be the healthy alternative. Um, okay, so let's see. We also want to give them education about emotional abuse, not just physical. We want to let them know also, specifically what physical abuse is and what some intimidation tactics might be. What is sexual abuse? What is consent? Sexual harassment. Want to let them know that grabbing or touching somebody, even if it's sort of accidental, right? Like rubbing up against somebody, um, you know, uh, rubbing up against somebody's, breast, butt, or genitals. That if it was an accident, right? But it clearly wasn't, or unwanted kissing, this isn't even just physical sexual harassment. This is also assault, right? Every bit of it. Verbal sexual harassment might be pressuring somebody, making comments about their body, even again, jokes, right? Put that in quotes again, because, it's very clear when something is, oh, it's just a joke, but, they definitely meant it. Rumors, writing notes, catcalls, threats about things like, so now we're talking about positions of power where maybe somebody makes a threat about grades or job status or something like that. That sexual harassment can also be nonverbal. It can be, making crude drawings. It can also be just staring at somebody in an extremely creepy way, and ignoring whenever that has, whenever they've been told that that's not wanted. Sexual gestures also would be sexual harassment.
Nate, that education about sexual harassment on the last slide, anytime I've talked to a student, had to tell them, the definition of assault and the definition of harassment and all that, I always at first get the no, and I'm like, yeah, like I think that education is important because I think
It
a
is,
lot of
yeah.
people, again, I mean, your reference about the attitudes, that some people have before, we have to wait for that to catch up, but this is definitely important information for people to have because it's a lot more serious now and taken more seriously, which it should have been all along, but fortunately we're there now as a society to be able to say, yes, this is serious.
Yeah, and you got to know, right? When I was in college, I worked as a security for like NIU, Northern Illinois University. I worked security for some events, and we had one of our people get spit on, and we had the person arrested for assault because that is assault. Blew me away at the time, but it was, it's a thing that was good to learn that, oh my God, yeah, that's actually assault. So speaking of education, we want to let them know about the cycle of abuse. That's going to be the honeymoon stage, tension building, a blow up, and then just return to honeymoon and hit repeat and start all over again. Um, it's important to help them understand where maybe they've been doing some of that justifying, right? About why they've stayed in the abusive relationship, that all kinds of reasons that people might start to justify the behavior is because of, they think, well, they love me, right? Or they kind of minimize things, they blame themselves. Maybe they just feel like it's hopeless, that nothing's going to change. Maybe they really just have some very skewed gender roles themselves, right? That they think that this is okay. Maybe it's a sense of shame. Maybe they've been completely isolated from others, um, you know, or um, or maybe they're afraid of being alone at this point. Maybe they think it's their job to fix their partner or some drug and alcohol use, right? But we want to help them explore their perception of these gender roles and also encourage them to challenge their own beliefs. We can't make somebody think differently, but we can encourage them to challenge themselves. Um, okay, hold on. We got a question here. Oh, okay. So Shelly, it looks like you're logging off early. So thanks for attending. Um, okay, so the some of the last bits of help that we have for the victim, we can help them explore the different role models that they have for relationships. We can help them look at their attachment history. Um, Help them explore what are their relationship values, like what's important. Usually whenever we're talking about values, we're talking about, kind of looking into the future and thinking, what is ideal? What do I want? Right. And is what I currently have, is that fitting with those values? Um, Use these values to create a checklist of relationships, of what they want, what they don't want, right? Figuring out boundaries and exploring that. Um, the patterns of attachment, we've got, secure, anxious, and avoidant. And I know that we're running out of time, so I'm gonna leave those dangling a little bit. Patterns of relating, that there's aggressive patterns, there's passive patterns of relating, there's also passive aggressive, and then there's assertive. Obviously, assertive is going to be that way of relating where we stand up for ourselves, but we don't do it in a way that stomps on anybody else. Practicing I statements, which I always have people rolling their eyes at me about I statements, and I keep bringing it up because dang it, they work. Okay. Whenever we're making safety plans, we want to help them figure out what are some of the cues that have happened before there has been violence in the past. What has been something that has worked for protecting yourself in the past, and what hasn't worked. And if it hasn't worked, let's forget that one. Let's work on the ones that have worked and try to come up with some new ways that might also work. If it seems like an argument is going to happen, right, then how can you be somewhere that there's going to be other people that can hear it, or there's less risk of actually being hurt? Get numbers in their phones about who to call in case of danger. Setting up code words with other people so that they know if there's something that's very serious and they need to be bailed out quickly. Figure out where are some safe places to go if necessary, that your partner's not going to be able to find you. Talk about orders of protection, medical care, and ways to increase their independence if necessary, maybe to start building up some of those methods of independence. Also, if they decide to end the relationship, how can they make sure that they are safe at that point too? Because it doesn't mean that they're out of the woods just because they told them to get lost. When we're working with other kids, our bystanders, we can encourage them to learn how to be there to listen, not to give judgment, but just to listen. Let them know not to pressure their friend to break up with the abuser. Acknowledge that their friend is probably confused and overwhelmed, but also maybe feeling still love and longing there. I really like, how the movie Inside Out kind of showed kids that people can experience multiple emotions all at the same time. That they can encourage their friends to get help, and even go with them if the friend wants. That kids can make an anonymous call to domestic violence hotlines, but also to just avoid judgment. Stay there as a support for their friend so that that friend is not alienated further. And if they witness any kind of actual physical violence or sexual violence, then they can go ahead and call the police. So that is the end of my presentation. I wanted to see, I mean, here's my contact information. We're in Jerseyville. My phone number is here. I've got my work email listed in our website. You can also check us out on Facebook, the Restorative Solutions Counseling LLC, because we have links to our weekly blogs. So if anybody has any questions, please ask. Or if anybody has any comments. Okay.
Really eye
Well,
opening.
feel free to reach out if anything does come up. If anybody does have any questions that they run past me or need anything in the future. But also, just at Restorative Solutions Counseling, we want to make sure that we're being a resource, for the community and for our other mental health professionals as well. So definitely hit us up if we can help with anything else at all.
Really eye opening stuff, Nate. Much appreciated as always.
Yep, happy to. I'm going to go ahead and give you back, if I can figure out how to do this. All right, so Kevin, you should be
Yep.
the host now.
Got it. Thank you. Perfect. All right. I'm going to stop our recording then.